beginning, before the credits ran, I was like staring over there and chatting. I've got a clock over there, and it's an Art Deco clock that I got off Facebook Marketplace. I suggest all of you go on Facebook Marketplace if you want cheap stuff. It's brilliant. all my furnishings, pretty much everything in my house from Facebook Marketplace. But I got an Art Deco clock, a really big marble one. And I was saying to Pete, I wonder what was happening at 9:25 on the day that the clock stopped working, because the clock doesn't actually work, so it's forever in that time frame. But that was what you saw if you were watching at the beginning, when I was wistfully looking over there, and I saw myself on screen and was like, thank God I wasn't doing something highly inappropriate, which is completely normal in my household. I live with men, we have very few boundaries. It could have been very, very, very bad for all of us involved. You could have been mentally scarred. I could have been highly embarrassed. And we were a bit late because a bee just flew down my chimney and then decided to fly around the room in a panicked state until I could get a little glass and take it outside to release it. So apologies for being late. How are you all doing, everyone? I will say before I carry on, I now have a free app that you can go and download. It's Appy on the Play Store and on iOS. It's just got lots of wellbeing stuff, and it's free, and it always will be. It's constantly improving as well. So go and get yourself that after this session. If you haven't got it, you may as well. It won't cost you anything. It's meditation programs, exercise programs, recipes. I made a vegetarian lasagna today using it. So there you go, using my own app. But anyway, just to say, because obviously it's Mental Health Awareness Week and everyone is talking about mental health this week, but for us, it's always the same, isn't it? We know that mental health doesn't live in a specific week. We know that it needs to be talked about all year round. And I know that a lot of people have been a bit worried today about some of the things that have been being said in government, about whether we're going to go back into lockdown at certain points. And I suppose I just want to say to people at this moment in time, let's not worry about things that we don't need to worry about, because that's just not going to do us any good. That, don't get me wrong, I know that it can be really challenging when somebody says, well, don't worry about that. But what I genuinely mean is you can't worry about something that firstly hasn't happened, and secondly that you haven't at this moment in time got the power to change. And I think that after a year of being battered in many ways by the barrage of negativity and the pain of isolation and all of those things, at least there might be some sun coming at some point, and hopefully we'll be in a situation where we can all see each other again, and then we can deal with the next stage of this as it arrives, if that makes sense. I know that doesn't sound massively reassuring, but it's the best advice I've got, because like I said, if there's one thing the past year has taught us, it's that we can't really plan things, but we can definitely protect our mental health to some degree. And I know everyone's knackered, because I'm having a lot of emails, aside from my normal messages, just telling me your stories and telling me how sad you are and how hard it's been and how poor some of you are and how challenged you feel about the current situation. And so just to acknowledge it as well, I get it. I have lockdown lethargy like you wouldn't believe. And even though we're kind of coming out of it now to some degree, it doesn't feel that you can embed that foundation of safety that you just want. So just to acknowledge those feelings. I also just noticed on Instagram, somebody had written a lovely piece about people who might be struggling in domestically abusive relationships, that apparently this has probably been going on for a while, but certainly something that I may as well highlight. If anybody is dealing with a domestically abusive relationship at the moment and they need to get away, Refuge have actually lined up with rail operators. And if you go on Rail to Refuge at Women's Aid, you email them. Yeah. Sorry. I think they know that because it was an email it's very pedantic, isn't it? It's a pedantic thing to say. Obviously that was an email, Mr. Smith. Rail to Refuge at womensaid.org.uk. So he'll put a link on the bottom so that anybody who's got those kind of issues, and that's brilliant. So if you are in a relationship that's problematic, coercive, violent, you don't need to stay, even if you've not got any money. I know it's really hard because a lot of women that I've worked with, and men, it's not just women, but you know, it's 3 out of 4 cases are male to female violence, so it is a higher gender issue. But a lot of those people have been in situations where they haven't even had access to their money or their bank cards, or their passport or any travel documents. So it can be really, really challenging. But that kind of an access means that you can literally walk out of your house, get yourself to a train station and ensure that you can get some safe passage, which everybody needs in those situations.
Facebook's not letting me post the actual email.
Facebook isn't letting him post the email, so I will say it again. If you go on Instagram or if you go on Twitter, I'll put it out there, rail2refuge@womensaid.org.uk. Sorry I wasn't around on Monday. It's just been one of those weeks. I think everyone's having them at the moment, so apologies. Back to normal now. Okay, let's get on with the questions. Hi Emma, I don't know if you'll have time to answer this, but I'm really unsure as to whether to have the vaccine or not. I'm not thinking crazy conspiracy or anything, but just future health implications. I'm already on medication for anxiety and I feel like I've got a gun to my head because maybe I won't be able to go to places if I don't have it. I hope you can help. Oh, that's a really difficult answer because the truth is your bodily autonomy is completely up to you and what you want to do with it should always be your choice. So I think to separate the answer, so do I think you should be forced or coerced into any medical procedure? No. Firstly, because that goes against the ethics of medicine. Secondly, because it goes against the Nuremberg Code, which is more a philosophical code, but nonetheless one that's probably very fundamental to what I believe is essential in a world that we live in right now, which is democratic and preaching bodily autonomy and knowledge and information. So that's a no to that. But do you think you should have it or not? Well, that's going to come down to your individual situation. I mean, I think if you're elderly and vulnerable, then chances are that would probably be a good thing. Not that I know a lot about that kind of issue. I think if you're young and you maybe want to give it some time to see what the medical literature will look like in 5 years, 10 years, I think that's completely okay. And then at that point, if you feel that you need to have it, then that's fine as well. So it depends on your age, without a doubt. It definitely depends on the kind of health implications that you've got, and anxiety doesn't seem to be a comorbidity that we'd be worried about. So I think you've got time to make that decision. I worry that the way that you're phrasing it says that you feel like this isn't something that you necessarily feel that you are ready for, but you feel that you're being told you have to have it. And I don't think you should have that conversation with yourself. There is absolutely nothing wrong, particularly if you're young, with waiting for the data in 5 to 10 years to look back and to see whether there were any issues and whether it affected things that you might not be aware of right now. I mean, I don't think that that's an unusual request, and I think that that's probably something that a lot of people will be doing. And I also recognise that for people, when they're talking about not being able to move freely, remember that they can't discriminate. There are many people. My son had anaphylactic shock years ago, had an EpiPen. He won't be able to have it. Not that he'd have it anyway, because he's just coming up for 19 and he definitely wants children. So he wants to make sure that even though there's probably not an issue with fertility, he wants to make sure of that, even though it might turn out, and probably likely will, that there's no problems. He doesn't want to risk it at this moment in time, neither does my 16-year-old. So he'll just take negative tests if he has to, if you have to prove it. So I don't kind of feel that worried about it, because they're not going to be able to discriminate, nor I would imagine will they wish to discriminate, because you would literally be meaning that certain people would not be allowed to do anything. And that would be horrific. And I mean, the moment that any government were to do that, there would be absolute protests against it, because we would be taking people who already have potentially limiting experiences in their world, and then we would be adding to those variables, would be impacting on every area of their life. So I think just don't worry about that. Again, don't stress about that stuff. Like, for example, I'm not going to be traveling this year because, one, I can't afford it. I think a lot of people are like that. But secondly, it's just too complex at the moment. I think TUI are doing some really amazing things though. TUI are paying for your tests, I believe. So they're paying for your tests. And then on top of that, from what I've been told, they're also letting you book, and if it gets cancelled, they give you your money back. So props to them. But they're obviously accepting tests. So you're in a situation where you don't really have to have that conversation with yourself at this moment in time. Wait till you're ready. Make sure you're fully informed. Make sure you are fully informed. Not told, but you're informed, so that you feel comfortable and confident. And then on top of that, make sure it's at a time that's right for you. And that's going to be dependent on your age, and it's going to be dependent on your health, and it's going to be dependent on your choices. And that's how it should be for every single thing that happens to us, and certainly to our bodies. and most definitely to our children's bodies. These are things that are okay to have conversations about. So if you want it, the answer is go and do it. If you don't yet, the answer is that's okay. And if you're scared about travel, recognise that they will provide alternatives so that there is no discrimination. And that might mean you have to have a test when you go abroad and so on and so forth. But don't get more anxious about that stuff yet, because honestly, we're not at that stage, are we? So worry about the things that you have control over and that you can change. Don't worry about the things that are bigger than you and that are going to make you feel hyper anxious in the world around you. Hi Emma, I'm wondering if you could ask some advice regarding my 12-year-old son's mental health. Oh, 12. His 10-month-old kitten got run over and died 2 days ago. And last night he had a panic attack, which I managed to help him breathe through. But a lot of issues came up with regards to everything that's going on in the wider world. I'd really appreciate any advice you could give me, because I worry that we can have different viewpoints from the majority and we don't want the measures that are currently in place. You've been trying to help many people and you've said something very nice there. Thank you, I appreciate that, and God bless you too. So don't feel like you're a minority. Sometimes it can feel that way, can't it? Because, for example, if you look at certain newspapers or listen to certain news streams, there is a particular narrative, and that's okay. You know, that's the way that mainstream is in certain ways. But that can make you feel isolated and it can make you feel alone in your beliefs. But actually, there are lots of us who have very different beliefs. I mean, if you speak to your neighbour, you might have similarities and differences. You know, but there'll always be something unique about the way that you feel. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us individual. You know, that's what we should be celebrating. What makes us really incredible is that every single one of us is unique. So if we aren't having unique thoughts, then we're robots. You know, if we're not having unique thoughts, we're either robots or we're terrified, because we'd only ever be doing something that we were told to think and do if we were absolutely terrified or if we were just a robot. So everybody thinks differently. So first of all, kind of draw that back and be like, okay, I might not have exactly the same beliefs as everybody around me, but I think the commonality is no matter where you are on the spectrum, pretty much most of us want things to go back to normal as soon as possible. There will be exceptions to the rule. I've spoken to quite a few people on the spectrum who've quite enjoyed having their safety of home and not going to the office. Mums who, you know, often have to give up careers because going to the office every day is a problem for them, and suddenly they're able to work from Zoom at home and it's transforming their career aspects. So there's some really good things as well. But when it comes down to actually restrictions and masks and all those things, most people are going to want to get rid of that, because that's not really how we're used to living, and it's not good for us on a human level, on any research level. It doesn't matter if somebody peddles one out. The truth is that we have so much evidence about what's important for human experience, and that's our contact with each other. It's our smiles, it's our conversations, it's our micro interactions every day with strangers. So don't worry about that. But this is a great example. You've got a 12-year-old boy, and firstly, it's awful to lose an animal. I keep saying this, losing Molly when she was having babies in the last year, to lose that dog, it's almost in the same category to some degree as my dad, which I know sounds ridiculous and amplified, but my dad was like a massive part of my life, and that dog like helped me in loads of ways, and like I was her protector, and I felt like I failed her. And I think a lot of us feel like that when animals that we adore die. So first of all, is a lesson in this for your son, and that is that firstly, life is not always fair, and that's hard for children to learn, but it's important. It's one of the things I say to my children, particularly my youngest. I'll say to him, like, I promise you that things will not get more difficult and challenging than these feelings that you're having now regarding my dad. And that even though that's a horrible lesson to learn, it's one that will mean that when somebody dumps him, or when he loses a job, or when he fails at something, the bite and the sting won't be as painful, because he'll have something to kind of recognize an experience that was deeper and more cerebral and visceral as an experience. So loss can be profoundly difficult, but also very educational. So let him be okay with expressing the fact that he feels life isn't fair. It isn't, and mirror it. Be honest with him. You know, sometimes, love, it isn't fair. Sometimes it's really cruel. And the thing about life is that we lose. And I always say, undertake to do it joyfully, but everyone struggles with that at times. I struggle with that at times. but help him to recognize that every one of those feelings that he has, they come from such a good place about who he is. They come from a really good place about him as a human being. To carry that pain and to mark the value of that animal's life, that sentient creature's experience, for him to have those feelings, that says something really good about who he is. You're creating a good, solid young man who feels deeply and feels connected wise. So know that about him and reflect that about him. And then when it comes down to the worries of the world, it makes perfect sense. They're on social media, they're watching TikToks, they're potentially looking at YouTube, they're hearing the mainstream narrative, and there's a lot of conflicts. So my child would not look at the BBC and believe it. He wouldn't even think about it because he's on YouTube and he's looking at the influencers that he follows, or he's on TikTok and he's checking out the American influencers that he follows, and they're telling him different things and different stories. So we all choose to believe where we believe, right? When it comes down to a child though, they're at a stage at 12 years old where they're trying to navigate that individual ecosystem within the self. What is it that I think? How is it that I feel? Who is it that I believe? Teachers, parents, friends, relatives, TV stars, influencers, all of these things. And this grappling and struggling and figuring things forward, this is coming from him trying to understand the world and figure out his views within that world and deal with the conflicts that are really challenging for adults. Come on, how many of us in the past 12 months have felt conflicted? How many of us have felt challenged? How many of us have had disagreements, even with our closest? Because everybody is experiencing this subjectively, and everyone is subjected to a certain amount of trauma wherever you are on the spectrum of how you feel about this situation. And your son is 12 and he's going through all the social experience changes, the educational experience changes, the physical, the testosterone, and now grief. So what's great about what's happened is you've just taken that moment and you've sat him down, and you've not just gone for the let's reassure you about the fact that we can get you a new kitten and that it will be okay in the end. Those kind of fast forward feelings kind of scenarios. You've gone like, how can I take this moment with my child? And how can I expand the way that he understands this experience? And how can I expand so that I can reach into his experience? That's a powerful thing you're doing. So my advice to you isn't about solving this. It isn't about resolving his feelings for him. It's just more a nod to you that you're doing it right. Like, let him know that this is life. It's cruel sometimes. It really is. It's tortuously cruel. And good things happen to really bad people, and bad things happen to really good people, and it doesn't have to make sense. And let him know that sometimes things don't have to make sense, because that can really help as well. And just hold him in that feeling. Allow him just to feel that instability of the fundamentals of the world around him, because what that is the growing understanding as a child that everything that we thought that was often has to dissipate to reveal what really is. So for so many years we keep our kids safe. We make them feel like we're magic and we can wave a wand and it will make it better, and until they go to high school we can pretty much get away with that gig, right? But then they get hit from all sides with reality, and it is a painful process, and one that every single teenager struggles with to some degree, and he's coming to that point now. So I think also just to acknowledge that this is a really challenging time, because it's about vulnerability and the revelation that actually life isn't quite the fairy tale that we believed it was, and it's a grief process. So he's grieving lots of different levels. He's grieving the sanctity of life, of his animal. He's grieving the vulnerability that he's feeling in the world around him. He's grieving the disparity of the world that he once thought he knew and the one he's learning to experience. He's grieving childhood as he knew it. He's grieving all of those things, and they're big on an individual level. And so all you can do is to hold him in that, and to know that when he's feeling grief, what he needs to seek is reassurance and support from you. So that compassion, that hug, that reminder that even though you can't make it better, you'll make sure that you hold his hand until it feels like he can manage better. And you're going to help him understand that every feeling that he has comes from a place because he's a special boy. He's a good boy, and he's developing strong emotions that one day will see in him loved by others, and will make him a great father and a great protector. And they're really good things. And I'm really sorry for your loss. I really feel it deeply when it's an animal. Of course, when it's a human, but when it's an animal, it can absolutely equal those kind of losses at times. I'm really struggling with anxiety about getting out and about after being stuck indoors for so long. Any advice? So FOGO, fear of going out, is a big thing at the moment. And the first thing I want to say to you is, it's totally normal that you feel this anxiety. There are people like me who were going through a massive trauma before COVID. When COVID hit, it didn't even touch me because I was dealing with something that was far more important to me. Simple as that. My dad's death, nothing could compare. Honestly, even if it had been Ebola, it just couldn't get the emotional bandwidth, right? It's one of those things, everyone's got an emotional bandwidth and mine was full. So my experience was different to somebody who might have been having the best time of their life, and then all of a sudden they can't go out, they're terrified, they're watching the news all the time, they're reading the mainstream media, they're conflicted about what's happening, they've got all these huge emotions. And then they understand that they've got to follow certain rules and protocols, and you do all of that. And part of that you might initially be questioning and thinking, this doesn't make sense, or why are we doing this? And that might be the case, or you might be thinking, my God, I never want to leave the house because I'm so terrified. The point is, your brain has to buy into it at some point. There has to be a point where your brain, if you want to kind of survive it, goes, okay, well, there must be a reason for this. And so the fact that you've bought into that bias, which you have to survive it, means that it makes sense that you're anxious. Because if you weren't anxious, what would the whole last year have been about? Think about that on a common sense level. Let's forget like therapy and the bigger issues and the wider issues. Let's just concentrate on the actual commonsensical experience and value of that. If you hadn't been at all anxious in the last year, why would you have carried on doing what you've been doing? You know, you have to buy into it a bit. Otherwise, it would mean that the whole year had just been some kind of bizarre pantomime. And so the truth is that you've actually got anxiety because you've seen these horrible reports and you've heard horrible stories, and it's been very scary for you, and you've had to socially distance, and you've had to be in certain situations where you wouldn't ordinarily feel like it was normal being human but not quite human as you know it. These are big things. So your bias and your rationale has become hardwired to some degree. And now it's just like, okay, it's okay, go out, but, because that's the other thing, you know, they're saying go out, and you're like, oh, I'm already a bit nervous about this because, you know, I've had a year and a bit of being told that something terrible might happen to me, and I've been hyper anxious about how to act in social situations because I don't want to offend anybody or upset anyone or scare anyone. And now you're being told, oh no, you can go back to the office. Well, that isn't how the brain works. It's not how chemicals in the brain work. It's not how biology works, and it's certainly not how social schema and experience works. So you are programmed at the moment to be anxious because you've had to feel that way to go ahead with all of these behaviours. Just know that that's normal, but it might have amplified a little bit more, understandably. Remember, your brain is there to do a very specific task, and it's to protect you, it's to make you survive. What your brain wants is for you to get from A to B as safely as possible. The fact that you've got maybe a higher survival mechanism in place where it's like, okay, we're going to keep you really safe, it's amplified it a little bit. You're going to need to expose yourself to your fear to get used to it. So that's going to take that anxiety, you're going to have to feel it, you're going to have to feel the fear, and that will teach you your courage. But you're going to have to grade it. You can't just expect to throw yourself back out there. And no one should expect you to. If you've got a manager who wants you back in the office, talk to them about flexible working. If you've got people around you who don't understand, express your fear. Don't be alone in it. There are lots of people feeling this way. Lots of people. And then on top of that, you really need to kind of accept that the other side of this is it's not being a, oh, go out, everything's fine. It feels tepid in the way that they're actually expressing it at the moment. It's like, go out, but there might be another variant, and go out, but then you might have to come back in again. So for an anxious person, one of the problems that we know is that when you can't kind of get your head around certainty within a situation, it adds and amplifies more anxiety. So because you have got this uncertainty constantly, that's playing into it. It's not a definitive and definite, yes, it's okay, get back to normal. So again, understand and be compassionate with yourself. So what can you do? You have to expose yourself to the fear, and then you have to do things like breathing exercises, meditation, reaching out and just telling other people that this is a struggle for you. If you've got mates who can kind of help you expose yourself to these situations, whether it's just get you for a coffee, help you to go around somewhere without a mask on, and so on and so forth, those kind of things will just help to build that confidence. Do some reflection as well. So look back at your best times, really visualize them. You might have always had a bit of anxiety. A lot of us, certainly my temperament is anxiety based. A lot of us have it, right? And sometimes it can really help to remember a time where we just felt like things were okay, to remind us, firstly, we can achieve it, and secondly, what were the ingredients that created that? And that's something that can be really helpful. So for me, it will always be out doing something fun, like a picnic, always cheap, with my kids, lots of laughter, lots of play, lots of fun. I'll take myself to that. Those kind of memories and visualizations remind me of how things were and how things can be again. So do some of that work as well. But most of all, have patience with yourself. You're going to have to reprogram that brain. We need a whole reprogramming condition, because people are really scared and are really anxious. And it might not even be about the virus. It might be that you've had a lot of time to just be in your own space and you feel safer because you're not having to socially experience the world, or your manager isn't always breathing down your shoulder, or your colleague that you doesn't like isn't just across the table from you giving you evils. These are all human experiences that can mean our anxiety raises. Or it could just be that you've lost trust, because there's been a lot of reasons to. So totally compassionate. And that's the message for all of us. I think what I've just said applies to all of us, because remember, what I always say about this space is you're allowed any opinion. That is what makes human beings so wonderful. I don't want each human being to think the same. I'm so tired. I'm so tired of seeing trolls and even media moguls abusing people for having disparity and disbeliefs in certain paradigms, in certain thought processes. That's what makes creation. That's what makes invention. That's what is curiosity. Without that difference, there is nothing unique. We have to find that bridge that always allows us to each cross to meet in the space where we have so much more that connects us and divides us. That's such an important thing. I am fine with whatever people's perspectives are. I'd rather them not be hate-fueled, but even then, I'd rather know, because that's how we develop, that's how we grow. If somebody's got some horrible attitude about something, I'd rather them be allowed to say it so that I can challenge it in a compassionate way, because that's how things grow and change. And we need to do a lot of that. I'm so tired of being told how to think and what's not right to say, and to be allowed in our society to have that denied is something I'll never accept. It's a critical point of what makes us inquisitive. And it's also what therapy is about. Therapy is all about allowing people non-judgmentally, unconditionally, to be regarded for the individual that they are, in spite of the flaws that make them the individual. We've got to hold that sacred. That is sacrosanct. It really is. Hi, Emma. Sorry to bother you. Thank you for your kindness. You're very welcome. It's Abby's, my daughter, who took her life's funeral on Friday. I'm so sorry about this. Obviously, I know who you are because of your previous conversations on these lives. My two youngest, 9 and 12, don't want to go, which is fine. But both of them have said, Mama, stay with me. We haven't really been apart since it happened. Last night, my 12-year-old was exceptionally upset that Abby is dead, and you want to be at the funeral and not with me, and I'm alive. I don't know how to fix this for them. I feel like I need to be at the funeral, but at the same time, I can just hear Abby saying, Mum, don't be silly, stay with them. I think the funeral will help me and give me some small bit of closure, but at the same time, if I leave the others, I'm picking Abby over them. I just feel like there's no right answers, and whatever I do, someone is upset. How can I help them with this? My heart and chest hurts under the weight of it all. I shouldn't really say what I'm going to say, because it's a direction, and that direction is maybe not the one that people would imagine I'd give. But this is Abby's funeral. This is your journey with your daughter, and it's going to hurt your other children. Okay, they're going to feel sad because They're scared and conflicted, and they don't understand what's happened to the world. They don't understand why Abby's died. They don't understand why she's taken her life. They're probably pissed off with her because the pain that they'll feel is horrible, and the pain that they'll see you in will be excruciating. But this is Abby's moment with you. Everybody has a different perspective and perception over what life and death is about. I think some people walk this earth for 100 years and that's their journey, and others are here for 3, and equally that's as incredible. I think sometimes we put a big base on what has meaning, and that years somehow quantify that, as opposed to the love that's shared within a finite amount of years. What happened to Abby, I remember, because I always remember these stories, and I always remember the people who come on here, particularly those with excruciatingly painful experiences like you. What happened is awful, and you should not be having to go through this. But there will be so many years within yours and Abby's experience that were brilliant, and the end wasn't, but we can't define her by that, and we can't judge her by that. For her, life became too painful, and often people don't understand that they aren't trying to leave us, they're just trying to figure a way to cope with the immensity of the agony. And unfortunately, the permanent solution is the one that was chosen, and we wish that wasn't the case. But when it comes down to you, you have that cord that's connecting you between, in my opinion, this dimension and the next. You probably feel it in your belly, that there's still that connection with her. And I guess that for you, the funeral is about you having a few minutes for yourself and your daughter to, at least in this life, have a punctuation mark on the journey between life and death. I mean, you'll never sever any cord between you and her. You'll always be her mummy. And as much as she will, in this dimension, still be the age that you always remember, you'll grow with her each year because she'll form a part of who you are and your identity. I think you should go to the funeral, really honestly, because I think for you, it will be something that you'll reflect on, and you might be upset with yourself and you don't deserve that. And your children, they can ask that question. Why are you gonna go and see Abby who's dead when we're alive? And the response is very simple: because I love you all equally, and because I love you all equally, this is Abby's day where I have to say goodbye to her, and I can't leave her alone on that day. And you can show them that that's a compassionate, loving action, and they don't have to come. I think that's fine, particularly the way things are at the moment. I can't imagine that it's going to be as warm as you would want it to be normally. That's my advice. Again, it's my advice. Don't do it if you don't want to. The other thing I'd say though is, if your gut is telling you something completely different, because what I'm hearing when you're saying that is that you feel guilty about leaving your children, but actually you feel it could be helpful for you to go to the funeral, and that's my important part, that it is important for you. You are allowed to be a little bit selfish. I know that's hard for you. You feel, because you've lost a daughter this way, that somehow you've got to completely protect your other children and never fail them because you've got some kind of guilt. We all have that around those things, like I do with my dad, but you don't deserve it. It's not you. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't fail her. It's just, like I said, pain sometimes becomes intolerable, and she wouldn't have wanted to leave you. She wouldn't have wanted to leave you in this pain. But I guess you having those moments just to process at that funeral and to say your words, whatever they are, and just to be still, that will hopefully not bring you any peace, but give you reassurance that you did what you needed to do in the moments that you needed to do them. And you will be able to pick up the pieces with your children, because that funeral is not going to be a pivotal moment where they decide that they think that you failed or succeeded at all. That's just their reaction because they don't want you anywhere but near them. And that's because the world has been horribly cruel to them. It's horrific. Winston's Wish is a charity that I hope you'll get in touch with. Winston's Wish is a lovely charity, and it works with children who have been affected by losing parents or siblings, and they do amazing workshops. They even do residentials that are incredible, and every child there has lost to suicide. And I would really, really encourage that you look at Winston's Wish. It's a beautiful charity. Honestly, if you want to look them up on YouTube, they've got documentaries that have been made, and it's so worth watching. If my children had been younger, I would absolutely have taken them to residential with them. Hopefully they'll be doing them again soon. Also, for anybody listening tonight, a lot of you know that I did the skydive the other weekend. Silence of Suicide, it's SOS charity. They're looking for volunteers, so they're looking for people who can become call handlers, call volunteers for people who are struggling. And it's very conversation based. It's not like Sam's, so it's much more about kind of engaging with that person and talking and chatting to that person. Not that there's anything wrong with Sam's way, I'm just saying it's a different one for people who maybe want more of a conversational experience. They're looking for volunteers. But also, if any of you are feeling suicidal, if any of you are feeling that you just need to talk to somebody, or if any of you are feeling that you've got mental health in crisis, you can call them. They really don't need you to be suicidal. You can literally just call them to say, look, I'm struggling. I was being told by one of the volunteers about a particular individual who rings every single week. She has a bounded time, and she has these conversations about her life, and it's really helpful. It maintains her. So like I said, there are charities out there that are really trying to meet those needs. So again, don't feel alone. And the same for you, as I was just talking about your daughter and all these things, just know that you can ring those kind of lines as well. They're great people, and it just reminds you that it's okay sometimes to reach out and say that you're struggling. But I think from every single one of us here, we'll all be thinking about you on Friday. I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child. I won't pretend I do, but I understand what grief can feel like when it comes down to that immediate loss. But I can't for 1 minute pretend that I know what it's like to lose a child. It's the most intolerable grief. And I hope that you're going to get some help with it, because you're going to need some peace and quiet and time to experience that spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically. It's enormous. Hi Emma, my partner of 4 years has bipolar and anxiety issues. Sometime over a year ago, she started working in a care home. The issue is with her bipolar, she constantly feels like she's being picked on, not doing enough or carrying herself. Basically, not doing enough. This is mostly done by senior staff and younger staff. This continues outside work when she, for example, will get text saying she said this and has done that. My partner now feels useless and wonders why she bothers. Is there anything you can do to stop the bitchiness and bullying in my eyes, and would really appreciate your help? So I think you're right. I think she's being bullied. It's not acceptable and I know, because honestly, I used to go in and do change work in employment and look at systems. I've done that kind of stuff over the years, and part of that is to explore the boundaries that we have at work. And one of those is we do not text people after work or in social experiences about their performance in work. It's just not acceptable, because it kind of breaches a boundary, and also it's really challenging for that person to manage, because we're meant to be able to have some boundaries between our work life and our home life. So I think you've hit the nail on the head that there is some bullying there. But the thing about the bipolar, there are people who have bipolar depression. I don't know whether it's type 1 or type 2 either, but there are people with bipolar who would never put up with any kind of criticism this way. So it's not a bipolar thing. The fact is that she feels vulnerable. It's probably more to do with her experiences growing up. Maybe she's felt marginalized, maybe she's felt bullied before, maybe she's been that person who found herself feeling like on the outside looking in, and because of her mental health issues as well, that then adds to her feeling that level of vulnerability. So it's not that the bipolar is causing these issues, it's her reaction to the way that she's been treated in the world previously, and add to that maybe some of the issues that she feels about her mental illness. So arguably, how do you manage it? Well, it comes down to her having stronger boundaries, and that's the hard thing with bullying. Bullies need to be put in place. I don't mean in an aggressive and hostile way. I usually mean in kind of an organisational construct. So there are a few things that you can do with her. First off, if she's really desperately unhappy in a job and it's impacting on her self-esteem to a degree where she's really feeling vulnerable, then I would always say that the biggest question is, does she stay? And I think that we often want to make people just go, right, just see it through, it'll get better and all that. I've never been that kind of person. It's the same with schools when parents get in touch with me and the kids are being bullied. I'm like, is this going to get better? Is this something that you can manage as an individual? Or is this an institutional issue? Are you the unlucky one that everyone takes out and projects their feelings about work onto because they see you as weaker or more vulnerable? Now, if that's the case, I'm always going to be saying to parents, get them out of that situation, because we can't change every single framework in there to make it better. you don't want people to be facing those kind of consequences on a daily basis. So you need to ask her that question and also explore that with her. That would be really helpful. If she does want to stay there, and it's more about the fact that she's taking things too personally, then it's how she can start building her self-confidence around that, isn't it? It's about what can you do to make yourself feel that you are not somebody with those vulnerabilities. And I guess that comes down to really challenging yourself. And you don't just need to challenge yourself in work, you need to do it outside of work. So she needs to think of a list of things that really scare her. And I mean, really scare her. Maybe it's what I did the other week, throwing herself out of a plane at 14,500 feet. But if it scares her and she completes it, it will fundamentally change who she is, because she'll realize that the limit that she thought she had was not correct. And the minute that we smash down those kind of barriers and boundaries, we increase our confidence, and we also recognize that the self that we believe that we were isn't the self that we actually are. So I would create a bucket list of fearful experiences that she can start working towards, and you can help her do that. You can even do it with her. Maybe you have some that you also need to conquer. And then when it comes down to the work stuff, so a bully can only bully somebody who's willing to accept it. And that's not blaming the victim. It's saying that as a victim, you can turn into a survivor by the style that you address it. Difficult people need to be handled in ways that work effectively for them. So if somebody is shouting at you, you allow them to run themselves out. You allow them to lose their voice. You just don't respond. They're looking for responses. They're looking for pushback. They're looking for tears. They are looking for escape. They are not looking for somebody who just very, very quietly stands there and waits till they're finished and then suggests that they express what they actually want from you in a more acceptable tone. When you do that, they've run out of breath. They really have. They've wound themselves down. They're not expecting that kind of response. Or you can just wait till they finish and then say, you're not in a position where you can talk to that person because they're so angry, and you can reconvene at another time. If they're a sniper, so they're going out of their way and slagging you off to people and basically lying about you so that you get into trouble and bitching about you, you have to surface it. Snipers require surfacing. So that's when you would at least challenge the person in front of at least 2 other people so that the lie is exposed and so they are shown to be the sniper. The only way you can diffuse a sniper is that kind of behaviour. You don't have to do it in a horrible way. It can just be in a, well, Karen, I don't know why you're saying that, because clearly when I heard Monica tell me that you'd said it, I knew that Susan there recognised that that couldn't have possibly been the case because I was somewhere else. You bring it into the paradigm of everyone being aware, and then Karen has to go off going, probably shouldn't have done that, now got found out. When it's a radiator who's a difficult person, so they're always moaning at you that you're not doing enough, you're not doing it well enough, all of those things, what you do is you ask them, okay, you give me the advice. You tell me what you need to happen. You give me a solution. You bleed them of that moaning, annoying, going on, and you make them create something solution focused. There are ways of handling difficult people, but the first thing is to acknowledge that the only way you're going to get that change is to change yourself a little bit. And like I said, that's a bigger conversation to be had with her, but be aware that you can train people around you to respond and react accordingly. And then on the bigger level, look, if she's getting horribly bullied at work by a particular group of people, she needs to go to HR, she needs to speak to whoever's in charge. It might not change anything, because sometimes it doesn't. And I would be lying to say that all companies respond and react accordingly as to how they should. But at least if she gets that logged, if nothing changes, and then in 3 months she feels that she has to leave, arguably it would be constructive dismissal, because her experience at work would have become so intolerable that she would not be able to do her job, and that they had been constructive in not changing the elements of that experience, and that would mean that she could actually seek recourse at an industrial tribunal, which could lead to a financial settlement. So have power in that experience and know that you can do something to change it, okay? Hi Emma, sorry for bothering you. I'm struggling to leave the house. I take beta blockers for the anxiety, but I just can't do it. Or the breathing you recommend, but it's like having a heart attack and someone twisting a screwdriver through my guts. Can't go on like this. GP does not care. It's hard at the moment. I'm not sure about different GPs. Certainly, I found the experience very frustrating. I am meant to have infusions, sometimes transfusions at my hospital, and I am a year overdue, and it's exhausting. And it seems to me that my GPs, God love them, are not necessarily very present at the moment. And I think that quite a lot of people are having that experience. I hope it changes. I'm sure it's all to do with backlogs of stuff. I'm sure no one's doing it on purpose. But at the end of the day, it is very frustrating. And I hear you. I hear that it's frustrating. Secondly, I was talking about SOS, that organisation. They will be able to be somebody that you can talk to whenever you fancy it. So I would really honestly give them a call after this session tonight. I would just pick up the phone, ring the SOS number, even say that I recommended that you call and have a conversation with them. Just allow yourself to debrief a little bit. We all need to do that. Like, we all need to debrief a little bit, to just unload, to let that go. So first of all, it won't make it immediately better, but having a resource that you can pick up the phone to and have a conversation with, that will ease a little bit of that anxiety. Secondly, I'm really glad you're doing the breathing exercises. You need to do more of them. Anybody who says to me, my breathing exercises aren't reducing my anxiety, it's because you're not doing enough of them. We need to do more of them. And my breathing exercises that I tend to have on my site tend to be quite simplistic ones on purpose, because I'm not doing breath work in the major area of my YouTube, for example, or major area of my Appy app. But actually there are some really intense breath works that you can do. So you probably want to look at somebody like Russell Brand. He does quite a lot of breath work. So obviously he's the actor and comedian, but Russell also does quite a lot of breath stuff and Kundalini work. But the breath work that he does is quite intensive. So we'll be talking about like breathing in, holding for 20 seconds, breathing out, because again, those kind of manifestations of breath work can be really powerful, and because they are almost hypnotic in the way that they relax you, they can be really effective, but they take a little bit more work. But like I'm saying, don't give up the breath work. It's effective. It just means that you need to do it differently or with a more sustained effort. On top of that, even though your GP is not listening, speak to your practice manager and tell them that they're not listening. Complain. I'll give you an example. My mum's been shifted from pillar to post in the past 2 years. She's fractured her spine before that because of medical negligence and prescriptions that she wasn't meant to be given, and it reacted really badly with her warfarin, and she collapsed and she fractured her spine. So it's their fault. And then my dad died, and during this time she's become more and more almost like scoliosis, where her vertebrae have become more problematic, and she started to bend over and bend over and bend over. And she went to see the doctors, the consultants, and it's been years, and I had to really fight to get her in at the point that she was going in. And then to add insult to injury, he told her he was going to do all this stuff, and then within about 2 weeks she got a discharge letter. That morning I emailed them and I said I'd be putting in a complaint to the GMC, and wrote a list of why I wasn't going to leave it. And within about 45 minutes the secretary called me, and within about 2 hours he'd called me, the surgeon, and within that hour that he spent on the phone, she wasn't just reinstated, she was given a second opinion, and she was also put to a position on the list where she needs to be. There are ways that you can do it. You have to be demanding. So arguably, I would look at speaking to that. I'm not saying that your GP deserves that, by the way. I'm saying that that's an example of when you don't get the treatment that you know you're meant to get, you can ask for help. So your practice manager will help you. You know, she will want you to get the help that you need. Just get in touch with them and say, look, I need to see a different GP in my practice. I'm not getting the help that I need, and my anxiety is really problematic, right? On top of that, you've got your breath work. The other thing that I'm going to add to that is, whether you like it or otherwise, it has to be the exposure. I know it's really difficult, but you have to do it. And it doesn't have to be massive. You know, it sounds like you've become, really at a point where there's a phobia forming, and it's the same in phobic work. It has to be about going and confronting the fear. Is there somebody around you that you trust enough to say, look, I'll hold your hand, I'll come with you. And we won't even go very far. Maybe I'll get you a takeout coffee and we'll sit on your garden wall. Or we'll just go down the road and we'll sit on that garden wall. Just make sure it's a person's garden wall that won't come out and shout at you. A lot of people have got shouty, haven't they, during COVID? A lot of people have lost their tempers for no reason. A lot of people have become abusive and aggressive. Although I did laugh at the one the other day where apparently somebody had parked a Skoda on an estate that they were living, and a neighbour had suggested that they wanted them to move it because it was bringing down the local area. And all I thought was, Skodas are a very good car, I'll have you know. Skodas are a very good car. I'm pretty sure that they're made by Volkswagen or something like that now. I think that's probably completely wrong. I know nothing about cars, but I know that Skodas are meant to be very good cars. But what I'm saying is you need to kind of do that exposure work. And don't settle for not getting help, any of you. don't settle for not getting help. We've got Nadine Dorries reckoning that they're throwing money at the NHS and all of that, but we've got to demand it then, haven't we? We've got to demand it. And like I said, you know, I was looking the other day at the NHS figures regarding doctor recruitment, and with respect, you know, in the last 5 years before COVID, they hadn't increased capacity of doctors, junior doctors at all. So the NHS was coping with 25% increased need the 5 years before COVID without new doctors. You know, they got the same amount every year. Well, that's really hard. So I think that there is that burden. I know we've seen a lot being given to them in the last 12 months, but again, they've just announced that the junior doctors that they recruited, they're letting go of. So you're kind of in a situation where even GPs are probably dealing with a mounting amount of pressure. It's a bit like teachers. I always say this about teachers because my sister's a teacher and I've watched in the past 20 years, you know, her job go from teaching English to a whole ream of other expectations to the point where, you know, people burn out. I do think that happens a lot in these kind of situations. Hi Emma, I'm going through therapy for complex PTSD. The therapist has mentioned inner child work to me. Oh, and the whole idea has made me feel awful and sick to my stomach for days. I'm not sure why it's made me feel this way. I'm wondering, is it essential to do this work to recover? No. Therapy is about your journey and your process. I have to say though, I do like the fact that the therapist has mentioned this. I really do. Because I know it's scary for you because you're thinking, well, wait a minute, what if, let's take you as sexually abused. I'm making this an assumption. I'm not saying you were, I'm just saying as an assumption. When we think about our inner child, we think about shame, we think about guilt, we think about abandonment, we think about loneliness, we think about all these negatives, right? So when I say, well, let's do some inner child work, you're like, screw you, I'm not trusting you with my inner child. My inner child got completely abused. My inner child got abandoned. My inner child got hurt. My inner child got horribly, horribly attacked. Screw you, stay away from my inner child. The little bit that's left of it, I'm keeping safe, right? That's a completely normal reaction. And the fact that you had it hit you in the gut, a lot of us feel that that's where our inner child is. It's kind of in there. But when people do like schema work, or when people do particular types of transcendental work, or when they do deep psychoanalysis, even play work, the inner child is actually the part of you that requires healing. It's the part of you that needs relieving of any negatives that you feel about that child. It's a part of you that needs to be comforted. It's a part of you that needs to be expressed. You know, a lot of children who are abused, for example, they don't have a voice. So they spend their childhood not speaking. They spend their adult and youthhood feeling shame and again silence. So the inner child is the child that didn't have the voice. It's the child that didn't get the soothing. It's the child that didn't get the comfort. It's the child that didn't get the security. It's the child that didn't feel the safety. And inner child work is about helping that child to get everything that it needs within the therapeutic paradigm safely, without any type of prejudice, without any type of judgment, just with complete connection and care. It's a safe place for the inner child to be able to be free and to grow and to develop and have its needs met, your needs met in this case. I know that you feel afraid of that and you don't need to do it. But I would always say, firstly, love it when there's a creative practitioner. It's great to have creative practitioners. You know, a lot of practitioners don't do that kind of stuff. To have that means that she's probably, or he's actually trained more heavily, obviously has a keen interest in that, obviously understands why they might work for you. Because remember, complex PTSD has that name for a reason. It is not PTSD, it's complex. And that means it might need some more creative, sometimes ingenious ways of creating solutions and helping you to grow and develop. But often the best place to go with that feeling is therapy. So I would go to your next session and I would be like, man, when you said that inner child stuff, my whole psyche just went south completely and freaked out. And I'm like left with all these questions. Why do I feel so afraid? Why do I feel so scared? Why do I feel so sick? Why does it have that impact on me? Why am I physically having this reaction? That is such a good space and place. Honestly, as a practitioner, that is so wonderful to hear when a client comes in with. Just walk in, take it in, make some notes, express yourself both physically, emotionally, express it. Write down how you're feeling, take it to your practitioner and be like, this is how it's felt. Let yourself work through it. Doesn't mean that you'll end up doing the inner child work. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. But it will mean that you can actually do something together that's really productive because you're owning those feelings. Remember, therapy is a non-judgmental, unconditionally positively regarded experience, which is congruent and honest. It's all about being present and real, okay? So use it. Sorry for the questions that I haven't answered. All of us, I think, want to take a moment to let the lady whose daughter took her own life know that on Friday we will all be thinking of her and just sending so many vibes that are both completely compassionate and understanding of the pain and also recognizing the enormity of the loss, just so that I acknowledge that even though I had to move on to a different question, that has obviously stayed with all of us, and it was a big one for a lot of you to hear, and I'm sure that a lot of you have had your own emotions about that particular conversation that we had tonight. I will see you again on Monday, sending you loads of love. Like I said, try not to focus on the stuff you can't control at the moment. It's really difficult, I get it, but it's also really important because the only thing that you have is now. And believe me, the one thing that you don't get back is time. So let's try not to waste more time worrying about things that haven't happened just yet. We can worry about that together if and when it does. And until then, let's look about our mental health. It's Mental Health Awareness Week. Got to be aware that a lot of us are struggling and it's okay. And I will always be here. So whatever happens, we can always come here and have this resource and chat to each other. And any of you who like crime, Sunday at 7, my next YouTube episode will be released. So thanks for joining me of that, by the way. It's really interesting to see people joining and like chatting. I'm like really surprised. I can't believe people actually subscribe. It's brilliant. Thank you. See you on Monday.